Welcome in, ladies and gentlemen. You're listening to Sports Time HQ. I am indeed your host, Fernando. Joining me today is two people, in fact. Of course, my co-host, Gary, but we're bringing back the doctor. The doctor is back in the house, Mr. Dr. Jesse Morse, and we'll start with the doctor. Jesse, how are you doing today?
You're doing great, ramping up for another fantastic NFL season. This will be season 9 for me covering content and injuries. Just trying to keep track of all the injuries and keep up to date. And we'll talk about a bunch of rookies today that had their fair share of injuries along the way. A couple a little bit more concerning than the others.
Gary, how are you?
Nah, man, I'm doing pretty good. This is, kind of a sad topic sometimes when it comes to talking about players and their injuries, but hey, they're prevalent in fantasy, so gotta talk about them.
At least we got the injury expert. Before we get into it, before you came on, Jesse, we do want to ask, are you a morning person or are you a night owl?
I am a night owl.
Really?
I go to the gym from 8:30 to 10:30 p.m. and usually go to bed between 12 and 1 a.m.
Oh my goodness.
I'm up at 6:30 and I'm seeing patients at 8:30.
How do you do it? How in the world are you doing that?
You're sleeping up when you're dead.
That's, amen to that. Amen to that.
I'm not putting in 120 hour weeks anymore. So it's only, between 50 and 60. So it's a light week for me, which is why I can still create content and run a couple other businesses and exercise. So
I thought you were about to say your 120 went down to like 110 hours.
No, I mean, that's what what I call suckers do in traditional medicine when insurance runs your life. But I run private practice, so I think I had 4 patients today, but I generated more than most people probably do in a month. So it's a little bit of a different. I do quality over quantity. So I spend 60 to 90 minutes with each patient.
And quality is always better than quantity. Can never go wrong with that, right?
Yeah, I mean, and that's the problem is that at the end of the day, you want your doctor to listen to you. You want to understand what's going on. You want, and you can't do that in 10 to 15 minute appointments. So I got out of that because I felt like a rat in a treadmill. It's like you can't, I'll come back next week. We'll talk for another 15 minutes. Who the hell has time for that?
Yeah, right.
So
exactly.
Address the issue, figure it out, create a plan and move on.
Honestly, these days, not many people have much time. So, they want to get the facts. They want to know the facts and they want to keep moving with their life.
Yeah, 100%.
So, can't go wrong. And you create your own schedules, right, for them?
Yeah, I mean, that's the beauty of private practice.
Can never go wrong. You run the show. Well, let's get into some quick news and notes. Just one specific news and notes that I want to talk about before we really dive into the rookies for today's show and how we're going to talk about whether or not these rookies are some rookies that we can trust in fantasy or if they're doomed from the very start. But the first set of news that I want to talk, or the only news, is J.K. Dobbins. He's planning on visiting the Denver tonight, and he's having dinner with the coaches, and he plans on visiting the facility on Thursday. Obviously, we know last year he rushed for 906 rushing yards with 9 touchdowns in 13 games with the Chargers. But obviously, we know J.K. Dobbins has had a number of injuries in the past. I mean, I think Jesse, we talked about it last year when we had you on. I mean, the guy just went through an MCL sprain. He's got Achilles tears, ACL tears, LCL tears. He's got a lot of problems.
Yeah.
So,
he defied the odds last year. He was the first running back in a long time that was effective in his first year back from an Achilles tear. But if you remove a couple of the first games and just look at the last 8 games or whatever, however many games before he got injured again, they were more volume dependent. He wasn't putting up 150 and 2 on like 8 carries or something crazy like that. Like he required 15, 20, 25 carries. And that's impressive nonetheless, but what's more telling is why is he still a free agent?
Do you think there's something more Do you think
It's
there's gonna be
literally
more?
June. And look at how much money he made last year. If they were that confident in him to do it again, why didn't they re-sign him? Why did they quote unquote trade or basically get Najee Harris? Why did they draft Omari and Hampton? So for me, it'll be interesting to see if he ends up signing to Denver or something else. RJ Harvey, my wife went to UCF. We watched him a bunch when he was here. He like that kid is a beast. Like when if there was a big play, it was Harvey that was doing it. Like the kid is like all of a sudden 2 cuts and you're like he's gone and you're like what the hell just happened? Like where'd that come from? And that was just who he was. So and you see the underlying metrics back up. Harvey unfortunately does have a history of an ACL tear, but it's been 3-4 years and he's been great. So I think that he will be that beautiful RB2, maybe even flirt with that RB1 territory. If his ADP gets depressed because Dobbins is there, even better in my opinion.
So you don't think Dobbins would really affect him all that much if Dobbins were to sign?
Yeah, it's probably more so depth. I don't think that Dobbins, he doesn't have the same skill set as Harvey. Harvey is dynamic, Harvey is explosive, and Harvey has fantastic hands. Dobbins doesn't have, he's no longer super explosive because of the Achilles, because of the ACLs. He's never been a big receiver. So it's like, if he's there, okay, fine. But I mean, I'm not expecting Harvey to get 25 touches a game. Like somebody else has to get some touches, at least in the backfield. And Javante's gone. So, I mean, there's not a whole lot of depth behind them. So I think realistically, it would potentially make sense. They probably want to kick the tires and see how he's feeling, see what things look like. He's had some gnarly injuries. Dobbins has had the craziest combination of injuries. And if he didn't have any of those, he probably would be a top 5 to 8 back. But now he's undrafted, or unsigned in friggin' the first week of June. And no big name running back has gone down. So that's probably why he hasn't been signed yet. But and this running back class was really deep. Really deep. So it's like, why would you have someone that has a lot of tread missing on their tires, a crazy history of injuries, when you can have fresh young blood that's 5-6 years younger and still elite or potentially elite? So that, in my opinion, that's probably what a lot of teams did.
And I mean that's what we see with a lot of these teams now. I mean that's why running backs don't get paid so much, because the reason is they're like, oh, rookie contract's done. All right, let's go on to the next rookie. The fresh legs, like you were saying.
Yeah, I mean, we have your exceptions. You have CMC. You have Chuba actually got paid, I think, a decent amount last year. Henry just signed a ridiculous deal. But most of the guys don't sign these crazy deals. Most of the guys struggle, quote unquote, for running back money or for rest of NFL money struggle because their half life is so short. They have a couple peak years, and then most of them are gone by 5-6 years. They've had a couple elite years. We only have about a handful of guys that have been quote unquote elite for 6-7 years. Mix in Caffrey, Henry, Aaron Jones, Zeke's obviously on his way out now. So there's only been a handful of guys that have actually maintained that high level. You have guys that had a fantastic 1 year. Remember, Ramondre Stevenson had that RB5 or 8, whatever it was that year, and he's struggling. Now they basically almost just replaced him with Henderson. So it's tough to stay at the top. And that's just, and particularly as a running back, it's tough.
It is. And Gary, you were a JK fan, no? Last year?
Yeah, of course. I mean, he went to Ohio State, so he's one of my favorite Buckeyes I've ever seen play. And he's always been explosive pre-injury, of course. And I totally agree. He kind of lost it once he got injured. But, I obviously love him for just getting back on the field, man. I mean, he's had a tough career so far. But yeah, I agree. I don't really think he would hinder Harvey that much, and I hope he doesn't, because Freddie, I am in love with RJ Harvey and landing spot and what I think the future holds for this kid. I don't think, like I said, that Dobbins will hinder it. I hope he doesn't. But if anything, it might help him if he's, getting those touches that kind of keep Harvey off the field and out of harm's way, I guess is what I'm trying to say here.
Dobbins, the past 3 seasons, out of the 3 seasons, he has played 22 games. Last year, obviously, his career highs, 905 of rushing yards. I'll ask both of you, do you think that this is the best that we'll see J.K. Dobbins ever in his NFL career perform?
Probably.
I mean, he impressed me last year, so, probably, but at this point, I wouldn't put anything past him. I mean, he defied all the odds with his ACL was one of the worst. He had a bad combination. He had a very complicated ACL tear because it was contact, which is not common. Whereas 70, 75% of them, they, just running, they cut and their knee gives out. Dobbins ran into someone which caused a tear. If he didn't run into him, he wouldn't have tore it, in my opinion, or at least not at that time. So he's just had some fluky years, and he's come back. He's missed a ton of games, appropriately so. But he's come back and looked way better than I thought he was going to. And no one expected him to do anything last year, and he probably won some people leagues, or at least made him way more competitive than we thought he was going to. And it was, it was like they transported the Ravens backfield to the Chargers. It was weird, but that's how it played out. And they looked really good.
Now, level of concern on J.K. Dobbins. Is there a concern for any re-injury? Obviously, you can't re-injure, but of course it could happen again because of all his injuries. On a scale of 1 to 10, what would you give him on a risk chance of getting injured again?
For Dobbins?
Yes. If you had to give him a number.
It's probably about a 7. He's pretty high.
Okay.
I mean, so in my opinion, the ACL, without looking at his injury history, his ACL was I want to say one side, and then the Achilles was the opposite side.
Yeah.
If I remember correctly. Now, that is likely a compensation pattern. So your rehabbing will just make it easy. Say your right knee, so your left leg you have to be more aggressive because it's your strong leg or your more aggressive leg. So now you're doing a lot more work off that left leg. We saw that with Cam Akers. And then eventually Cam Akers tore both sides, I believe. I don't know if they've ever confirmed it was Cam Akers both sides, if he retore it. I think it was both sides. And Marlon Mack for that matter too. So I have concerns about Achilles. I have concerns about chronic knee injuries secondary to ACL because of how complicated it was. So unfortunately, and just the nature of high ankle sprains, hamstring injuries, like there's just the lower extremity injuries for these running backs is kind of unfortunate. Pretty much every running back has had a high ankle sprain in some capacity, whether it's from a fluky play, from a hip drop tackle, like whatever it is, and they take them out for 2, 3, 4, 5 weeks. Even if you're lucky, and it can derail the rest of the season.
It very much can. And with the level 7 grade, Gary, as a fan and everything of J.K. Dobbins, are you willing to give him a chance in fantasy?
It depends where he's being drafted because, it also depends where he lands. But due to last year, his price might be, relatively high.
Like free.
At least
he might be free.
Yeah. Yeah.
If he's free, then obviously we can't tell 2-3 months from now, but if he's free, you could do worse.
For sure.
Especially if he lands in a good spot like Dallas or somewhere where their depth is mediocre at best. Denver is not the worst spot because there's not a whole lot of depth there, but like if you put him on Carolina or back with the Chargers, it wouldn't really make a whole lot of sense. It's like there's plenty of depth there. Unless both guys get injured, I don't see him jump leading. So I think it really would I kick him kick his name in a deep league or in a best ball? Probably. You could do worse, and especially best ball where you just set it and forget it, But I think right now we don't know where he's going to end. We don't know what his ADP is going to be from now to then.
Yeah, that's no doubt 100% true with J.K. Dobbins. He could also be, if he doesn't sign now, he could sign in August if there's a player that goes down during training camp.
Oh, yeah.
Well, let's get into the injuries for the rookies. And of course, we will start with the main position of them all, the quarterback position. And we'll start with first Tyler Shough. And now in college, he had a history of shoulder injuries, but there wasn't really any setbacks. He managed well with rehab. At least that's what we know. We don't know. Maybe the doctor knows more. But Tyler Shough, I'm thinking there's not much of a risk level with him. Obviously, he does land on the Saints, which, again, is not that great of an outlook for fantasy in general. You're already on a losing battle. But Tyler Shough, Jesse, what's your thoughts on his injuries? Is there anything concerning for him?
So this kid's got a fascinating injury history. I tweeted this last week or the week before when I was doing his injury history. If you follow baseball, he went to high school with Cody Bellinger.
Really?
The year, I want to say, after he was in high school, Bellinger won the AL Rookie of the Year.
Oh,
that was 9 years ago. You want to know what's crazy? Shough backed up Justin Herbert at Oregon.
No.
It's just wild.
Like,
the guy's old.
He's like 25 or 26.
Yeah.
But here's the reason. Well, COVID year kind of screwed everything up, so we'll give him a pass on that. He fractured, I don't remember if it was left or his right collarbone, which is the last bone to fuse in the body, so it's more brittle. The first time he did it, he missed the rest of the year, but he didn't have surgery, which usually tells me it's a relatively benign fracture. It's usually mid-body. It is what it is. The first game of the next season, he fractures it again. I was like, are you kidding me?
Yeah.
Therefore, this time he had surgery on it, but that was his second season. So he missed back-to-back seasons with basically the same injury. If he went out of his way and had surgery the first time, he wouldn't have fractured it the second time. It would have been damn near impossible. This is not the most common injury in quarterbacks. Aaron Rodgers actually did this on both shoulders, one on each side, like 5 or 6 years apart. It was the only time he missed more than, I think, 2 games besides when he tore his Achilles in 15 years or whatever it was. And he put crazy amount of screws in one and crazy amount of plates and screws in the other, and he never had any issues. This is relatively benign for a quarterback. If you want to have a shoulder injury, this is what you want, for a quarterback. And then I think he fractured his fibula or something which is your ankle, which isn't a big deal either. So I would much rather have a fracture than a labrum or an ACL or an Achilles, a soft tissue injury, because the fractures for the most part are pretty straightforward. Whereas, especially if they're clean. But if it's the tendinopathies, the issue that Drew Brees dealt with, and now Derek Carr, the guy he retired yesterday, those are much harder to fix. Even the crazy stuff that I do with stem cells, very hard to fix, especially on a throwing quarterback that you're expecting to throw him 30, 40 times a game, if not more, every week. That's a separate discussion. You can do that in a running back or another position player that may not use the shoulder as much, but someone you're asking to throw with velocity and touch and finesse and weird angles, completely separate discussion. The fascinating thing about this is probably a perfect spot for him. He doesn't have any competition. Spencer Rattler was awful. And then
wasn't Rattler
supposed to be really good? He's not very good either. He has Olave if he can stay away from concussions. He has Rashid Shaheed, he's a beast. He had a meniscus repair, and he'll be fine. He should be fine. They usually do pretty well recently. And then they still have Kamara, and he's basically free. He's essentially free, and he has 3. They're probably going to be playing from behind. So it's like, would I draft him as my QB2? Probably not.
No.
But in a best ball in a crazy deep stack, he's basically free. I don't know, unless he gets injured. I don't know how he could miss the job. They drafted him pretty high. It's not like he was a 7th-round quarterback and we're praying for Purdy again.
I mean, do you think this shoulder injury could come back?
No, I don't, because they did surgery on it, so I'm not worried about it. And it's been like 4 years. So it's like, it's not like it was recent. It was like, it was like 3 or 4 years ago. It was a long time ago. So, I mean, I'm assuming he's hit it many, many, many times between now and then. And if it would have re-injured, it probably would have re-injured like it did the first time. So, yeah, it was just an unfortunate thing. And the timing of each of them, he missed, basically almost 3 full seasons with his ankle, the same shoulder. And then with COVID, that's why he was in college for 6-7 years or whatever it was.
Man's old coming to the league now. But, I mean, that's always good news, though, that Tyler Shough, it has potential. Now it's whether or not the ball's in his court, whether or not he wants to provide any.
It's his job to lose, in my opinion. Yeah, another guy who started really late, the Eagles backup Tanner McKee?
Yeah.
I did his injury history, I don't know, 2 years ago, whatever the hell it was. And he actually went on I want to say it was like a Mormon like trip, or they have this religious trip for like 2 years in Brazil. So he's like 25 or 26 when he started as a rookie too. So quarterbacks can get away with it. Like, look, Rodgers is what, 40 or 41, and technically he's still relevant. Joe Flacco's about the same age as him. So most quarterbacks aren't 21, 22. Jaden Daniels is a little bit of a freak, and Drake May to an extent, but most of them do much better later in their careers. The 28, 29, 30, early 30s, most of them do pretty good. So age doesn't concern me as much for quarterbacks as it does for pretty much every other position, or most of the other positions.
And McKee spent 21 months in South American country.
Yeah,
he knows fluent Portuguese. That means I can have a good conversation.
That's Brazil. That's what I'm saying. Yeah. So isn't that fascinating? So it happens. It's fluky, but it happens.
It is fluky, but obviously, the more experience that they have, usually means that they have a better chance. Yeah. More experience. Another guy I want to touch on is I want to say Jalen Milroe. I mean, I think that's the other main quarterback I kind of want to talk about. He dealt with some minor ankle sprains in 2023, but I think that's just about it for injury-wise with him. I don't see that really being a problem. I'm a big Jalen Milroe fan. Gary, you're a big Jalen Milroe fan. Jesse, I don't know how much of a Milroe fan you are, but in terms of injury.
I'm going to pull up his injury history in a sec because I feel like I'm missing something. For him, I think it's more so about where he's at right now. I think he kind of reminds me of Jalen Hurts, kind of in how he played out. Obviously they spent a ton of money on Darnold, so we're assuming that that Darnold's got the job and he's going to be fine and whatnot. And then, unless there's an injury, we're going to have to wait for Milroe to wait his turn. Now, in terms of athleticism, kid is a freak. He's like, they've compared him to like a more shifty, better runner than Lamar. That is a ridiculous statement. I didn't watch him a whole lot. I spent so much time watching NFL. I don't watch a whole lot of college. Yeah. But if you're comparing him to Lamar, that's ridiculous. So, I mean, obviously the arm wasn't the best. If I remember correctly, he had issues with his accuracy and whatever. But if he's that much of a threat, a la Jalen Hurts, if you can kind of do decent with your arm, you can be a problem.
Then again, I do want to say they did compare Cam Ward to Patrick Mahomes. I saw some reports on that.
Yeah, I mean,
to the draft.
We'll see.
It's crazy.
I mean, that Mahomes is a little bit of he's been struggling the past couple of years, but but he's in a class of his own, so it's hard to compare him to other people. But we'll see. I mean, if he was in next year's class, Or last year's class, where does Cam Ward go? Fourth, fifth? Like in terms of QBs? After Bo Nix? Like, I don't know. Somewhere he probably wouldn't have been first. I can promise you that. You know, and most people, if they had a choice, probably would have taken Jaden, at least at this point, at least based on what we know right now.
Yeah, 100%.
You know, yeah. So no specific significant injuries from Milroe. Correct. I had a couple things we left, but no big injuries. So I go back as far as I can. Usually high school, but most of the time they don't document that very well. And you know. A guy, Alabama's not the best with discussing injuries. They really, really do not talk about injuries, especially unless there's surgery, and then they don't really have a choice. But if it's like nicky-nacky stuff, they do not talk about it ever. So you can he left the field hobbling, but you don't know any more than that. Like, they literally don't say anything. So unfortunately, we don't have any details. But you know, I like the talent. Maybe he shows us something in a couple of years. There's fluke injuries all the time. You know, remember a couple of years ago when there was there was 50 quarterbacks used or some freaking crazy number, probably more than that. You know, so we never know what happens. We never know what could happen. And maybe they use them for wildcat type stuff because of how nasty he is with his legs.
I'm excited to see Milroe. I think this guy's one of my favorites in the class. Gary, I know, of course, yours as well. So there's no concern there. It's, again, we got to wait on the Sam Darnold situation, Jesse. Before Gary has to leave, because he does have to run out, I just quickly want you to mention your take on the Browns / Shedeur Sanders, because Gary is a Browns fan.
Let's hear it.
He's been a big Browns fan, and you know, he's been living a tough life.
Yeah,
I can appreciate that.
Yeah.
So of course,
who wins this job? Who do you think?
I mean, I think it should be Flacco, but I don't think it should be more than the first 8 weeks, if I'm being honest with you.
I mean, I agree. I think obviously their future is probably not with Flacco. At least I hope not. That would be pretty bad for the franchise. Watson, I don't think is going to play this year. No. If he does, he moved more mountains and paid off, a couple of Saints. But I saw Dylan Gabriel when it was at UCF, and he was okay. He didn't move mountains. Like, he was pretty good, but he wasn't like, oh my God,
a 3rd round pick.
He did well the last couple of years, so obviously he was justifiable. But if Shedeur didn't have the quote unquote baggage that he had, I think obviously he would have went a lot higher. Shedeur, just covering his injury history real quick, he did have a right wrist contusion or issue, relatively mild, but he had a pretty significant back fracture. In mid to late November 23, it wasn't clear if it was thoracic mid body or lumbar lower body, but he did say in an interview in the off season that he took 2 months off before he really started doing anything. So we've seen what we call transverse process fractures. Derek Carr had one years ago. Stafford had one years ago. So they do happen in quarterbacks. That probably was what it was. But the kid's tough. I mean, he seems like a tough kid.
Yeah.
So
I mean, I couldn't.
No concern. Go ahead, Gary.
No, I was gonna say I love the kid. I think he's a competitor. I think he's getting a little bit too much hate, just obviously because of the shenanigans that the family likes to kind of portray. But no, I think he's a great player, and I think he's a hell of a first round talent in my eyes. So man, I hope maybe he can break the curse. I got my fingers crossed. But yeah, so that's enough about the Browns. We don't have to talk anymore about them, please. But good show as always, Freddie. I'll see you on Sunday. Thank you, Doc, for seeing us, and I'll maybe see you in August, hopefully.
My pleasure.
All right.
Thank you, Gary.
See you guys.
Adios. All right. So to move on with the show, of course, now we talked about 3 quarterbacks. Is there any other quarterbacks that you're any type of concern, really? I know we have Jackson Dart, Dylan Gabriel, Graham Mertz, which are really irrelevant, but basically Jackson Dart, Dylan Gabriel, not really much concern there, all too much.
Yeah, Cam didn't have any injuries that I could find. There was one other, I can't think of his name right now. We talked about Show. He had the biggest injury history. Most of the other ones were pretty straightforward. They didn't have any, Dart is probably the only one that I could see potentially starting this year besides Cam Ward.
Yeah.
Shador, I wouldn't be surprised if he eventually started. But for Dart, I'm going to pull up his injury history right now. I've put all the quarterbacks in. I haven't put the rest of them in. So Dart did have a pretty significant knee injury when he was at USC. That had MCL sprain, which is the inside of the knee, meniscal tear. He probably had a mastectomy, which is partial removal. And then he didn't miss any more time with it at all. That was 4 games. He had a mild left ankle injury in 24, and that was it. So, isolated, relatively isolated knee injury that does predispose him to a knee injury. But in general, that's a pretty clean injury history for someone that did have a knee sprain. But in general, I like the kid. I heard, I think sounds like he's pretty talented. I think this is a great spot for him. I don't think Russell Wilson is the answer. And I'm not overly worried about his injury history per se. He doesn't have massive red flags. Deshaun Watson coming to mind, he had massive red flags. Yeah. He had an ACL tear before college or in college. He had an ACL tear on the opposite side when he came into the NFL. Yep. And he was still pretty elite for several years. And then he had his whole scandal and he's just been pretty much injured and or irrelevant ever since. But not many quarterbacks have crazy injury histories before they come in. It's just hard to make it to the NFL if you're always injured as a quarterback. Show was able to kind of defy the odds. But and when they get to the NFL, that can be a different story. If you want to see a crazy injury history, look at Matthew Stafford's injury history. Holy mother of God, it is ridiculous.
It's a whole book.
One of the craziest you'll ever see. It's bananas.
It's a whole book the guy has. He could write a book about it.
And he had a stretch of like 7 years or something that he didn't miss a game. So that's what's even crazier about it. But if you look at the beginning, because he's 38 or whatever. Yeah. You look at the beginning of his career, he missed like a chunk. He had multiple surgeries, significant injuries, not like little things. And then he went like a huge chunk of time where he didn't really miss anything. And then, he's had his fair share of issues along the way ever since. But most quarterbacks do pretty well. They're so protected, quote unquote, that they don't suffer the same fates as most of the other guys.
And for instance, he defied all odds after all the injuries. He's got himself a ring.
100%. He's got his own ring. He was the first pick forever ago. He's made stupid money. He's still relevant. Now he's got a new toy in Devontae Adams. Puka is just a freak. He's got Kyrie. He's got some new running backs. I'm not ready to write him off this year. I think he's going to hang it up when he wants to hang it up, not when his body's going to give out.
Yeah, I think he's still got plenty enough in the tank if he wants to keep going.
Yeah.
Let's go into the running backs now. I only have 2 running backs that I really wanted to talk about. Amari and Hampton, he was obviously a big one. You mentioned a little bit earlier, but again, he had a broken ankle back in 2021, and he re-injured that same ankle, I do believe, in 2024, this past season. The risk level that I have him under is around a 7 risk level. Maybe that's a little too high, but obviously he was still drafted pretty high. So there must be
he has some crazy volume. For the most part, that's a decent amount of time. Ankle fractures are kind of a pain. We saw Pacheco struggle with one last year and come back, and he'll probably be semi-normal again. It does cause some arthritis in the ankle in the long run, usually, and you almost never get arthritis in the ankle. It's super rare unless you've had a fracture. That's pretty much the only time you're going to do it. But I mean, ankle sprains, whether lateral, classic, or high ankle, or way more common than pretty much any other injury, just the nature of the game. So is he at high risk for re-injuring this side? Yes. And you've probably heard me say this before, and I say it all the time. The greatest risk of future injury is past injury. So he's at higher risk for having an ankle injury on this side. The tissues in the ligament are weaker than they should be because of all that he has more scar tissue over there. No, I can't say, hey, he had someone like myself go in there and break up all that scar tissue and reinforce it with PRP or stem cells or something so that it's as quote unquote good as new. I don't know. Maybe he did that, but I doubt it because not many guys will go out of their way to do that. And now you have to think about compensation patterns. Does that opposite knee get a little bit more stressed because that other ankle isn't as stable? So you have your soft tissues, you have your ACLs, you have your Achilles, and you have your ankle foot issues. Those are your main stuff for your running backs. So is he at higher risk than some of the other guys? Yeah. I think probably 5'6" is probably appropriate. But in my opinion, almost all the running back baselines are about a 4. Like they're just at such a high risk for injury because their volume is crazy, or presumably crazy, and they're in the trenches. They're in the nature of guys, hanging, tracking on getting these high ankles like Joe Mixon had last year, and they're just getting so beat up. So that's unfortunately why they're at higher risk for injuries compared to almost all the other positions.
So like right now in Dynasty, he's kind of like the consensus 102 in Dynasty. Are you fine drafting him as the second running back in Dynasty, for instance, versus taking maybe Travion Henderson or Quinton Judkins?
So I think each of them have flaws. I think John T's in a special league of his own. He doesn't really have any history. He doesn't really have any injuries.
Guy's a freak.
History. He's definitely a freak, and he's as close to Saquon healthy that we'll probably ever see. But with that being said, I think the talent is there. I think the volume has the potential to be there. Am I ready to say he's 20, 30, 40% better than Judkins or Henderson? Not sure if I'm ready to say that yet. I think Henderson has stupid potential. I'm a little biased with it being a Patriots fan, but and then Judkins
no bias here.
Judkins looked better than Henderson a lot of the times, and he was a friggin' touchdown maniac. And he's a talented dude, right? And that backfield is for the taking. He could be the next quote unquote Chris or Nick Chubb there. So would I be surprised if either of them had great careers and ended up doing better? No. What Hampton has going from him is he's got great hands. He's from what I've been told, he's a pretty good blocker, and he's a great runner. So I think he will probably be the RB2 appropriately. I don't want to throw Harvey away completely, although most people are saying because he's a little older, maybe he loses some of that steam. And then Caleb Johnson, I know, is very talented, but he's not a receiver, so that really kind of knocks him down. He's a beautiful, I believe it's zone runner, which is perfect for the Steelers, but he doesn't. He's going to get pulled off on third downs most likely, unless it's short, because he doesn't really catch the ball. So that makes it a lot harder to say yes, he's in the top 2, 3, 4 because of that. So it makes sense. Hampton is after Jonty before the other kind of grouping.
Yeah. So there's no really concern for Hampton. Maybe the biggest one, like you said, re-injury, possibleness of arthritis, which is very
but it's not, in my opinion, it's not enough to pass on him.
Yeah.
Okay.
Of course.
So you understand the risk is there, but it's not enough to pass on him. I will leave you with this one caveat for him. There has been one NFL running back that's a starter that has not missed a single game at all due to injury, due to whatever, since he started.
Derrick Henry.
No, Henry broke his foot.
That's right. AFC or NFC?
Always AFC.
Always AFC.
Meaning he's always been in the AFC.
Always been in the AFC.
It's relevant to who we're talking about.
Oh, man. Eckler? No. Eckler's in NFC now. AFC, ETN, no. Joe Mixon, no. He missed games. Jalen Warren?
Najee Harris.
No. Najee. I was getting there. Oh, Najee Harris.
Which is who Hampton's competing with, right? Technically.
Yeah.
So if your potential is to take over the backfield when a player gets injured, and the primary guy you're facing has never missed a game due to injury, I'm not saying it can't happen.
No,
but
of course.
But and we saw him struggle last year to an extent, and he's never really been an elite receiver. So that's why Warren was always relevant. But it's interesting to see that Najee, has always been healthy. I mean, he's not always been the best player, but he's been healthy enough to get on the field, or at least power through whatever he's dealing with. So I think that gives him a little bit of benefit, and maybe he only takes 30% of the workload, or 35, as opposed to an 80-20 split or something crazy like that.
So you don't expect like a 50-50?
Maybe early on in the season.
Yeah, of course.
I think that makes sense. And not often do they give a rookie running back, 100% of the volume or 90% of the volume in week one. Like, I guess it's possible, but it's just probably unlikely. But probably start off at 50-50 or 60-40 with Najee leading it, and then as Hampton proves that he's just a better player and more elite player, then I think he'll end up getting the field more. Fair
enough. Cam Scatterbo, he had a hamstring injury during the combine. Now, obviously, you mentioned in previous times you've been on the show that players, obviously, when it comes around training camp, they're just notorious for hamstring injuries because they don't usually play for a while. And then now here we are, combine, he's got the hamstring injury. And the problem with it is sometimes it lingers and stays lingering. So is there concern for Scatterbo?
There's a little bit of elevated concern. If I remember correctly, the majority of the injury histories are on my phone, which I'm viewing with, so I can't look at it. But I don't remember him having a significant injury history besides this. He was, if I remember correctly, he was pretty benign. So with that being said, he's only at a little bit injury risk. I will give you a good example of someone who had a similar situation and now is significantly frowned upon and was taken actually earlier than him last year, Marshawn Lloyd.
Okay.
Lloyd had 4 different hamstring injuries last year. 4. That's freaking impossible to do. That's very hard to do. He had one early in the season. He had like this time last year.
He was always injured.
Then he had a re-injury to that. Then he had another shoulder or something else. Then he had, I want to say, an appendectomy, an appendix issue. And then he re-injured the same hamstring, and then they shut him down for the year. I think he played 1 game, if that. So that would be a worst case scenario, right? It's not, in adding insult to injury, Marshawn Lloyd right now was practicing with the rehab group. So which means he's not 100%. So, unfortunately, some guys, we saw Christian Watson deal with this. They just have issues. Hopefully this isn't applicable. This was a fluky thing, maybe a mild little strain, not a big deal. But it's worth monitoring. If you told me that he's going to lead the backfield, I wouldn't be surprised. I mean, some of the underlying metrics are concerning for Scatterbo, but at the same time, he doesn't have a whole lot of competition. Is Tyrone Tracy going to really, dominate the backfield? I think Singletary's still there, and he was pretty good when he was in playing. But would I be surprised if Scatterbo had a decent season? No. Is he going to finish in the top 10? Probably not. I think that would be a crazy, but would I be surprised if he misses a month with a hamstring strain? Nope. I think that's probably
really,
baked into the risk. But he's on my short list of guys that I'll draft later in the draft in the deeper league.
Yeah, I've in dynasty leagues, I've seen him actually be reached a lot because obviously once we see these top running backs go, there's really no other running back besides him. And then after that, there's really just kind of backups and boom bust.
I will argue with you there because there's a couple guys that I like, but one of which is Tootin.
Oh, really? You like him?
Oh yeah, this kid is.
You're the first person I've heard to like him that much.
Okay, so I will give you one comp to him, and it will open your eyes a little bit.
Okay, my eyes are open.
Irving.
No way. No way.
Look at the underlying data.
Wow.
Look at the underlying data. If you told me that Cohen, who just came from Tampa, says, you know what, ETN struggled, Bigsby's really never been super effective. Let's give this kid a shot that has been really elite in college, is a fantastic runner. Possible, I wouldn't be surprised. I think, this class was so deep that he was drafted a little bit later than maybe he would have went in a different class. But in general, I've been quote unquote reaching for him because I think he has a lot of potential and he could be that kind of deep back. And I also like Taj Brooks, the kid for the Bengals.
I don't mind him. I like him. Yeah.
Because of how he runs, and I just think that he can relatively easily surpass Zach Moss. And then Chase Brown had a ridiculous season last year.
Unbelievable.
But remember, he pretty much never left the field in the second half of the season. Like literally never. He was like almost 100% snaps. That's not regular. That doesn't happen. That wouldn't have happened if it wasn't for Moss's neck injury. So, and if you look at the underlying metrics for Brooks and how he runs, he is a perfect fit for the way the Bengals actually run in terms of zone and in terms of how he runs. So he's kind of a sneaky guy where I would not be surprised if he ends up getting a lot of touches, or not a lot, but some touches, enough to be a thorn in Chase Brown's side.
Interesting. I don't mind Taj Brook, but Titan I'm gonna have to look more into because I never had him super high, and I wasn't a guy to reach for him or really look at the board. I was kind of just like,
I wouldn't say I would reach for him per se, but he's a guy like, there's Managi that's been struggling in camp. There's Giddens who he could justify. Jonathan Taylor's had his fair share of issues.
Yeah.
There's a bunch of kind of deeper guys that have there, but in general, I think he's on a short list of issues.
Yeah, fair enough. And to give you a rundown of Marshawn Lord, by the way, 1 game against Indianapolis, 6 carries, 15 yards. That's how we closed the running backs.
That's it. And you want to see a crazy injury history? Click on his on my site. It's crazy. For how young he is, it's crazy.
All the injury experts. Wide receivers. There's 4 big wide receivers I want to talk about. The 4 big ones that a lot of people are drafting. I know there's 2 of the 4 here that I'm always drafting, but let's start with the number 2 overall pick, Travis Hunter. I mean, he has had multiple injuries. He had lacerated liver in 2023. He had a shoulder injury in 2024. Is there a lot? I mean, the guy wants to play both sides of the ball. We don't know if the Jaguars really want to do that. They kind of want to stick him to really just the wide receiver side for now anyways, maybe occasionally corner. But is there a lot of injury risk with him? Because I think there could be a little bit.
Yeah, I do. He's lean.
Very.
He's going to be taking shots if he does play both sides of the ball. He's going to be taking shots. That injury, that shoulder injury is at higher risk. For re-injury. I have to look at his specifics, but if I remember correctly, it was probably the same injury twice or same shoulder twice.
Yeah.
And then the laceration is usually from fractured ribs. That's usually almost always how it happens. So they don't usually tell you that. They just tell you, hey, he's got a laceration in liver, kidney, whatever it is. Depending on the severity, will depend on how long they're out. But that usually happens because he broke his ribs. The rib turns sharp and then cuts the local organ, depending on where it's at in the body, depending on which level of rib it's at.
Yeah.
So, in my opinion, yes, he is at increased risk. The other thing is that I'm not completely sold he's an elite wide receiver.
Yeah,
You know,
I think I had T-Mac kind of over him more than Hunter himself
you
being
know,
number one.
if you think about like, and the only reason he went wide receiver two overall is not because he was just a wide receiver.
He can play
Is
both
because
sides.
he's potentially elite at both sides of the ball. That just made him a unicorn, right?
Shohei
You
Ohtani.
potentially get two elite players in one, which is ridiculous, right? So I get why. With that being said, if you look at his underlying metrics, his YPRR isn't like amazing. Like it was
Yeah.
good, but it wasn't amazing. I saw him play live, and he was good, but he didn't like. I wasn't like, oh my god, like I wasn't freaking out. And then some of the film guys are stoked, like they're saying this kid is
Yeah.
ridiculous. I'm not ready to say that yet. I still think he'll probably be either the top one or two, depending on how McMillan does this year
Mm.
in terms of volume for rookies. Like I think that's
Yeah.
probably realistic. Maybe Kyle Williams surprise us if he does some crazy stuff with the Patriots.
Please
You
preach
know.
it.
I think there's a couple other guys that have potential. Matthew Golden has a lot of potential, has a pretty significant injury history.
Mm.
He's got the speed, he's got the abilities, and they have 14 receivers. It feels like, but they still drafted a new one. And there's a couple other guys that I like. I think Higgins has potential, but I think it's probably going to be Hunter and McMillan as the
Mm.
top two guys, which makes sense. Um, and if you're if you're playing second fiddle to the guy that just finished as the wide receiver 4 and Brian Thomas Jr., I think you're gonna we could see another Jamar Chase T
T.
Higgins
Higgins.
problem
Yeah.
where you have two guys that are, I mean, and that obviously depends a lot on Trevor Lawrence if he can get his act together. But I mean, and Brenton Strange is kind of nice. I don't
Not
mind
bad.
him. So I think this offense has a lot of potential if they can put it all together. But even quote unquote, if Hunter stays healthy and he ends up playing every game, if you say he's going to catch 80 to 100 balls, I probably wouldn't be surprised. You
Mm.
know, he's a top 5 pick. Yes, it's a dual position, but there's a scenario where they're concerned about Strange. They're concerned about BTJ enough to say, they can't double team everyone. And if
Yeah.
as long as Lawrence can get his act together, I can see it happen. Am I going to go out of my way to reach for Hunter in redraft? No. And even in Dynasty and in startup, I probably wouldn't reach for him.
No.
But I think he's a decent fit.
Real quick on a take on him. Do you think if he went to a bigger school like LSU, Alabama, like Ohio, Buckeye State, do you think that he would still be number 2 overall based on the competition he would also be facing?
Well, if he repeated, I mean, remember, he was a 5-star, so there's only so
Yeah,
many of them.
yeah,
There's not many,
yeah.
right? There's not
It's
many.
true.
He chose the route he chose. He learned from one of the greatest, at least at the cornerback position, right? So there's probably a lot of impact there. But if he went to LSU, if he went to Ohio State, which has been a breeding ground the past 5 years
Yep.
or so for wide receivers, you have a completely different level of quarterback in general. You have a completely different level of offensive talent around you, and you have elite playmakers on the other side of the ball. You're not facing a whole lot of that at Jackson State. You're not facing a whole lot of that at Colorado.
Yeah.
You are going to be the guy because you were on the field at Colorado, but at LSU, you're facing premium 4 or 5 talent from Alabama, from all these elite schools. Whereas you're just not going to have the same level of talent week in and week out at Colorado. So I think that plays a role. If he did the numbers and what he did for both sides of the ball at LSU or at Ohio
That's a
State
different story.
or Georgia, or even Alabama, he would be even more impressive than he's already been. But it's hypothetically, I don't. It's tough. It's tough to say. If he repeated that, then in my opinion, that's even way more impressive because now the talent level is 2-3 notches higher than you're going to get at Colorado.
I cannot disagree with you. I can't disagree with that one. Emeka Egbuka, he had a high ankle sprain in 2023. Now, obviously, there is high ankle sprains. There's always a concern for it being a re-injury. Obviously, he's wide receiver 3 right now with Chris Godwin, which we'll talk maybe more on that hopefully in the future. And then Mike Evans, of course, he's going to be there for a little bit at the wide receiver 3 behind. Is it okay to say if you're drafting him for a team that you're either rebuilding or you're in a championship and you don't need him because the first year player for Emeka has no fantasy relevancy?
So talent-wise, I love this kid.
I love him so much.
Stud. I'm almost disappointed he ended up where he ended up.
Agreed.
In my opinion, this is Jackson Smith and Jigba all over again.
Yeah, I agree.
He ended up, he was behind DK. He was behind Lockett when he was still really good. And then he kind of had to wait, right? He was good, but he had to kind of wait.
And he finally popped out.
And then he balled out last year, and this year he could be even crazier. And he's I feel like he's being slept on a little bit. But now you have Mike Evans, who's still elite, right? Chris Godwin, who, as far as we've heard, he should be ready for week 1. I haven't heard anything otherwise. And don't sleep on the other McMillan. That kid was good.
Yeah, Jalen
right?
McMillan
Don't worry
was
about, K. Dotton, I don't think is going to be as important this year. Obviously, Bucky's still relevant. So as much as they throw, unless one of those 3 gets injured, realistically, how much volume is EE going to get in his rookie season? So, I love the talent. I think the situation is tough right now. And you're probably going to have to reach for him in Dynasty over someone that might help you in the first year, but maybe you're thinking a little bit more long-term.
Yeah, I've been drafting him everywhere for long-term value because I think there is a lot of long-term value with him. As far as injury, no real big injury concern that you have with him. He's just
I don't believe so. I can't remember off the top of my head. I don't remember there were any being significant injury history with him.
Okay. Jaden Higgins missed some games in 2023. I don't know if you know any other reports on Jaden Higgins. Again, obviously he's in Houston.
Give me 1 second. Let me look.
Jaden Higgins obviously being
no games missed.
Okay, fair enough.
And then let me go back to EE. Just a left ankle sprain in 23. He had surgery on. He missed 3 weeks. He had a high ankle sprain with tightrope.
Okay, and there's no.
He's done fine after. Usually, the guys who do tightrope, they do fine. They don't have any issues after that. And then
Trey Harris is our last one. Leg and foot injuries in 2022 and 2023. Obviously, a lot of people are very high on him.
So he had surgery in early 23, missed 2 games, probably a little scope of his knee. If I were to guess, a little mini meniscus removal, which is a little concerning. That does increase his risk for re-injury in the future. But it's already been over a year, almost 2 years, and so far he's been okay. He did have a groin strain and he re-injured it and missed the final 2 games. So he missed 3 games. He tweaked it. So this is actually a little bit of a concern for the left groin because these are notorious for injury. These are very frustrating injuries because they this tissue does not heal well. Every time you put your foot in the ground, every time you pick up your leg and rotate it, when you put your foot down and push off, you need that groin, the adductor tissue. So when that happens, oftentimes you can have some issues with this. So realistically, soft tissue injuries sometimes concern me, groin injuries in particular. This is not usually an area where he has surgery on. Usually it's not that bad. But that tells me that unless he did something what I do, and even then you have to be really aggressive with the needle, and most guys don't want to do this because of where we're talking about. You have to break up the scar tissue and help to provide nutrition. So if there's anything that gives me a little bit of pause for Trey Harris, as his YPRR is ridiculous, and his location is ridiculous. I think Herbert is a perfect fit. I think he has monster potential, but this groin gives me a little bit of hesitation.
So there is concern for possible re-injury, and I think there's something really to monitor in his first year You'd say?
Yeah, I mean, the tricky thing about groins is that usually it's a 2 to 3 week injury, unless they got really lucky. But it can limit zap explosiveness. It's just an annoying injury. It's really annoying. And regardless of your position, it's a tough injury. It's a very frustrating, uncomfortable injury, and they really they really suck regarding just pain, re-aggravation, that type of stuff.
Yeah, I think if you're drafting him, you're drafting him with a lot of high ceiling value, of course, with Justin Herbert there, but there is obviously that cautiousness with his possible re-injury.
Correct.
Any other wide receivers you want to talk about? I know you touched a little Matthew Golden hint earlier. I don't know if you wanted to touch on anyone else, or we can move on to
let me look. Talked about Hunter. A.O. Mayor has had a couple of significant injuries. We'll see how that plays out. Royals, not a whole lot. Had a little foot injury. Restrepo, we'll see. He's kind of an undrafted free agent, so we'll see how that plays out. Let me see. Golden has had some fair share of injuries: rib injury, groin strain, turf toe surgery, left ankle sprain. So he's definitely had his fair share of injuries. He's probably the riskiest injury history wide receiver out of all of them. Burden's had a couple, but he didn't miss any games. And then the Tet had a lower leg surgery in 24 in the spring. Unclear exactly what it was, but it missed 3 months, so it wasn't it wasn't a mild thing. But yeah, so but not a huge red flag for him. There's a couple. We'll cover the tight ends now, but there's a couple tight ends that I think we need to discuss because there's a couple that have some decent risk.
Yeah, and we'll start with Elijah Arroyo, who tore his ACL not only in 2022 but also in 2023. Obviously, with ACL tears, I mean, there's not so much concern because they can come back with it, but obviously, the expert.
So here, I was looking at this deeper, and I still haven't got a whole lot of clarity. But from my understanding, he tore it in early September or late September in 22. He missed the last 8 games of 22. And then from my understanding, he actually missed the first 5 games of 23. But I don't think he retore it. I think that was just him healing from the first one.
Okay.
Because if he had retore it, he probably would have missed all of 23.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's unlikely to be a repeat ACL tear. It's like Jonathan Brooks. It'd be more of likely maybe he had a scar tissue like J.K. Dobbins did, or maybe he had a meniscus issue, or maybe he was a little slower in rehab than he wanted. And a bone bruise in that same knee, which is not surprising because he's probably got meniscal tear. They probably removed some of the meniscus, which then allows for a higher level risk of bone bruising in the Senior Bowl game. So February of this year. Is he at increased risk? Yes, he has. He definitely has increased risk. But for where you're going to draft him, probably not the biggest risk.
So you're going to give him maybe like a 6, I'd say, maybe a risk.
Yeah, I'd probably give him a 6 to 6.5, 7, somewhere around there.
Okay.
He's the riskiest tight end out of all of them in terms of injury, although there are a couple that do have high risk. But in general, because of that knee injury, repeat injury, I think that's something to discuss. Fannin had a couple different injuries. They weren't much to talk about them, but he did miss 3 games, and then he had a significant wrist injury in high school that basically cost him almost his entire junior season. So, but that kid was incredible. He really did some crazy numbers for where he was. I think Tyler Warren had only had one little minor injury, and he didn't really have any issues. The injury history that's actually probably the most impressive, and they really haven't really talked about it a whole lot, is Colston Loveland.
Really?
Yeah. So Colston Loveland had a significant injury to his shoulder in early 24.
Okay.
When I mean significant, I mean 90% of players would have missed the entire season.
Wow.
He missed 2 games and still caught a ton of passes. In the offseason, we found out that Dr. Eltrash, who does a lot of the pros, he's out in LA, had 2 different surgeries to perform. What happened to Loveland? I believe this is right shoulder. So there's 6 grades of AC sprain, which is this top joint right here. So grade 1s, or what we call type 1s, are pretty mild. You know, the guys that sometimes play the next week like nothing ever happened, although they're not ready. The type 2s, maybe they take a week or 2 off and they come back. They're pretty not as bad. The type 3s half go to surgery, half to go to rehab. They miss about a month, sometimes a little longer. This is what happened to Anthony Richardson. 4s, 5s, and 6s all go to surgery. Why? Because the shoulder, where's my model?
Let's get the model out.
I'm trying to think. I don't think I have a good shoulder here. I have one in my office. But so long story short, what happens is the shoulder, the collarbone either gets stuck underneath it or goes behind it, which is what happened to him, or fractures. So in one of those scenarios, it almost always goes to surgery. So he had a shoulder dislocation and his collarbone popped behind the shoulder. He had it probably stabilized, and then he played the rest of the season. That's incredible.
That's unheard of.
That's incredible.
How did he not somehow injure it or anything?
I don't know. I have no idea. I have to leave in a sec, but it was incredible. Yeah. So I want people to appreciate the significance of this injury and the fact that he played the entire season and then had surgery.
To close it out, do you think there's any possible chance of a re-injury in it?
No, he had surgery. He hasn't been cleared to return yet. He'll be fine.
Perfect. Jesse, of course, want to mention injury experts. Do you want to quickly mention everything?
Yeah, check out the site. Draft guide will be available in a couple weeks, probably early July. All the rookies will be there, a deep dive for everyone, and then just check out the TikToks and the YouTube channel if you want just the regular free content. If you want a little bit of a deep dive, we have a subscription model and everything.
Dr. Jesse Morse in the house. Always great to have you, and of course, hopefully, we can talk more of NFL in August. But again, go follow him all over social media at Dr. Jesse Morse, and go follow his page, Injury Experts. And I'm your host, Fernando. We'll see you all in next week's show on Sunday. Later on, Jesse. And of course, next Sunday, we got ourselves Dave Hellman, former co-host. He'll be coming back. And then check out our upcoming shows. We got NFL Fantasy Spanish expert Mauricio Gutierrez coming on. NFL expert Laquan Jones coming on, ESPN expert Eric Moody, Jeremy Pope on FTN, and again, also NFL fantasy expert Marcus Grant. We got a whole list of guest stars coming in June and also beginning of July. So it's a bunch of shows you don't want to miss. Again, if you haven't done so already, go to trophiesmack.com/sportstimeHQ and go yourself a trophy, ring, or bell, anything that you want. And of course, the more you buy using that link, you can help us and we can help you. Again, also go use code SportsTimeHQ on Underdog Fantasy. They're going to match first deposit up to $1,000. Yeah, you heard it, $1,000. So again, use that code SportsTimeHQ on Underdog Fantasy. Again, Jesse Morse was in the house. Appreciate him coming on the show, and we will see you all on Wednesday.